Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another Quran study. God willing, today we'll be reading from Surah 17, verse 24. Let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. And lower for them the wings of humility and kindness, and say, My Lord, have mercy on them, for they have raised me from infancy. Your Lord is fully aware of your innermost thoughts. If you maintain righteousness, He is forgiver of those who repent. So these verses are a continuation of the previous verses regarding the major commandments and the commandments that God has decreed regarding our parents. And so God wants us to be kind to our parents and lower, when it says lower your wings of humility for them, it means that, be extremely humble and kind to them, knowing that, they have raised you and took care of you. So we have to do our utmost best to make sure that we treat them with as much kindness as possible, right? And rightfully so, because for people who become parents, they'll realize how much of a struggle it is, every day, to raise children. I mean, parents have to sacrifice a lot in their lives when it comes to raising children. Their social life, their rest. Their parents, they stay up nights, trying to, take care of the children especially when they're young, and financially, they make so many sacrifices just so they're able to provide for their children. So emotionally also, it is definitely something that God wants us to be mindful of, obviously. And just like to reiterate, just like any other category, if your parents are stuck in disbelief and you don't have any hope for them, then you can disown your parents. And God says that anybody, whether they're your parents, your children, your siblings, if you love them more than God, then obviously that will backfire against us, and basically these people will fail their test in submission. So God will continue reading. Verse 25 says, Your Lord is fully aware of your innermost thoughts. If you maintain righteousness, He is forgiver of those who repent. Now, this is something that is, a characteristic of God, that He knows the innermost of our thoughts. Even what is in our deepest, mind, God can read it very easily, better than we can read ourselves. But God's, He's a forgiver of those who repent, who maintain righteousness. God knows, we're weak people, and, we would have, things that we need to work on. But obviously, thoughts that race into our minds. Working on ourselves as submitters and improving ourselves is an ongoing process for every person on earth, right? Even after they pass their admissions test, they go through the purification process up until the very end. So God knows a lot of these things. We're not perfect creatures, but God sees our efforts, and He sees the people who are genuinely believers in Him, not pretentious show-offs. Then God sees all of that, and He helps those people, work on their shortcomings as well, and He overlooks a lot of their sins, and He forgives them, because whenever they realize that they fall in sin out of ignorance, they repent, and God is the acceptor of repentance as one of His attributes. Verse 26 says, You shall give the due alms to the relatives, the needy, the poor, and the traveling alien, but do not be excessive extravagant. The extravagant are brethren of the devils, and the devil is unappreciative of his Lord. Even if you have to turn away from them as you pursue the mercy of your Lord, you shall treat them in the nicest manner. So, this is a commandment regarding giving to charity. Um, and it is important for us when we give to charity, we give it to the relatives, the needy, the poor, the traveling alien. I mean, people who immigrate from another land and, leave behind their lives and trying to get situated. Um, uh, Now, naturally, I mean, helping such people is something that is charitable. You know, helping them get situated. But God is, also telling us that we should not be extravagant. Remember, it's the devil's uh, trick always to try to push people to the extremes. You know, someone wants to be righteous. And devil can really come easy and push him to the extreme. Say, okay, yeah, you want to be righteous, give all your money away. Like really just be extra pious and give everything. But God doesn't want that either, because God says the extravagant are brethren of the devil. You can't be extravagant. I mean, you can be generous in terms of what you give, knowing that, but obviously you have to look at your means and look at your needs as well. So if you give away more than you can afford, then, and that's being extravagant, even if it's talking about charity, right? So we have to make sure that there's a balance based on what we can afford, and we give based on what we can afford. And all these other examples of or all these other suggestions that we might feel sometimes, where devil wants you to be extravagant, we should know that it's coming from Satan, right? Because God doesn't want that for us. God wants us to also have our own share from what He gives us. That doesn't mean obviously people are stingy, should be stingy too, because God wants us to have a balance, right? And verse 29 says, "Stinginess condemned. You shall not keep your hand stingily tied to your neck, nor shall you foolishly open it up, lest you end up blamed and sorry. For your Lord increases the provision for anyone He chooses and reduces it. He's fully cognizant of His creatures, seer." Yeah, so I mean, we can't be stingy either, and so we have to strike a balance between being not stingy and being not extravagant, right? Um, we have to use our brains. And God says He increases the provision for anyone He chooses, reduces it. Obviously, God controls all our provisions. He's fully cognizant of us. He fully sees all our actions every day, based on all of the things that He knows about us and about what's good for us. He sets a certain share for us, and based on that, He provides for us. Abortion is murder. Verse 31, "You shall not kill your children due to fear of poverty. We provide for them as well as for you. Killing them is a gross offense. You shall not commit adultery. It is gross sin and evil behavior. You shall not kill any person, for God has made life sacred, except in the course of justice. If one is killed unjustly, then we give his heir authority to enforce justice. Thus ye shall not exceed the limits in avenging the murder. He shall not exceed the limits in avenging the murder. He will be helped. You shall not touch the orphan's money except for their own good until they reach maturity. You shall fulfill your covenants, for a covenant is a great responsibility. You shall give full measure when you trade and weigh equitably. This is better and more righteous." So there are, several commandments for us to remember in this life, right? I mean, God, so, and some of these commandments are, very simple rules that we can easily apply if we want to. Be righteous, right? And God has detailed for us. Number one, well, not number one, but I mean, in the order that I just read, one, you shall not kill your children due to fear of poverty. So don't do abortions. It is prohibited because it is murder. There's no exceptions to at what stage you do an abortion. If you're going for an abortion, it's murder. Don't do it. as the messenger has clearly identified here too. Because why are people doing it? Most of the time people are doing it because they feel that they can't provide for the child. I mean, a lot of times, at least for married couples, right? I mean, people who are unmarried, of course, God says do not commit adultery. So they're committing adultery, which God says also is a gross sin and evil behavior. And you should not kill any person, don't kill people, and we can see how the so-called Muslims are adhering to this command where they have killing as a punishment for anything and everything, and they brutally kill people on the streets. They lynch them, just for simple things that they believe are insults to their idols. But God says that God has made life sacred, and people should not be killed except in the course of justice. And there is obviously law of equivalence too, that you cannot kill a female, for example. If a male kills a female, you cannot kill the person because it's not justice. And God is giving excuses for people to save lives. And it's also not necessary that if a man kills another man, that man has to be killed. You still have the option of forgiving the murder, right? Still have the option of letting go so his life can be saved. Obviously, the person who's dead is not going to come back by killing this other person, and then you kill the other person, and then his family is going to suffer too. So there's more suffering on top of someone else's suffering, and obviously God doesn't want that either. And that's something that is going to be hard for people who are in that situation. But obviously it also depends on the circumstances, because God has not prohibited it. God has allowed it in certain circumstances, right? So you also have to see the level of remorse. A person may kill someone and feel no remorse, and in other scenarios, a person may kill someone and just be very remorseful and apologetic and genuinely repenting, right? And we have all types of scenarios, and there could be situations where that if this person's allowed to live, he'll go and kill other people, or let's say it's a serial killer or something like that, right? So in those scenarios, you have to use your best judgment, right? And God says if they decide to enforce justice, God has given you the authority. The heir, who is like the children of the person who was murdered, they have the authority to enforce justice. So, but they cannot exceed the limits in avenging the murder too. So we have the law of equivalence, obviously, right? So you have these limits in place, and then also, they have to be equitable in how they go about it. Verse 34 says, "You should not touch the orphans' money except for their own good." So if you're entrusted with orphans, taking care of them, and they may have some inheritance that you're also taking care of, you cannot touch that money except until they reach maturity, right? And obviously, when they reach maturity, then you can give it to them if you feel that they're able to take care of themselves. And God says we shall fulfill our covenants, for a covenant is a great responsibility. So fulfill our promises, keep our word. And verse 35, we have to be honest when we do business or work for someone. We have to get full measure when we trade and weigh equitably. We cannot cheat the people out of their rights. They pay for something and then you give them something, promise them something, and then you give them something that's fake or not worth what you promised them. And God says this is better and more righteous. So if you want to be righteous, you will take care of these basic commandments. Another basic important commandment is verse 36, crucial advice. You should not accept any information unless you verify it for yourself. I have given you the hearing, the eyesight, and the brain, and you are responsible for using them. And God says in verse 37, you shall not walk proudly on earth. You cannot bore through the earth, nor can you be as tall as the mountains. All bad behavior is condemned by our Lord. Right? So the first thing is the crucial advice. Why is it crucial? Because God has given us brains, right? I mean, and we were talking about before when there were some people talking about animals being able to understand them for some reason, which doesn't make any sense. But if you use your eyes and the brains to verify the information, I mean, you can just talk to the animal and see if they understand you. Just run a simple experiment. Um, you know, and this is interesting because I think Huda, you don't mind me sharing it. So I mean, Huda did this experiment recently when we had this discussion. She has a bunch of cats, and she told her cats, she said, I have some really nice food, a lot of fish, I believe, in the refrigerator. No, not in the refrigerator. Sorry, in the other room. He said, "Go and get it," and the cats were just like, looking at her like, obviously, if they knew that there was fish in the other room, they would run to it before she even finished her sentence. But obviously, they didn't have a clue what she was talking about. You know? So God has given us eyes, ears, and brains. If you think that you can talk to the animals, go talk to them and try to communicate with them and see, how far I get. Run some simple experiments. And I mean, that's just an example, right? But let's look at a more complicated scenario. Let's say you hear something about someone doing something, or some event that may have happened, or someone telling you like, hey, sell all your shares, um, you know, um, or whatever, some financial information, or put anything, right? Let's say anything that matters to you, right? So if something that matters to you and you want to accept it, don't just accept it without verifying it. Don't accept things blindly, right? That's what God is telling us. So obviously, we have when it comes to the Quran, we verify it. We have the Quran. We have the messengers. Guidance and explanations, elaborating those verses in the Quran. You can verify those things. But like, let's say there's some news, certain event, or someone tells you, hey, your neighbor committed manslaughter. You're not just gonna accept them from show, oh, really, like, and you go after him and do something or call the police or whatever. I mean, but the thing is, you have to investigate, right? I mean, an investigation doesn't necessarily mean that you go ask the person, hey, did you kill so and so, right? Obviously, he's not going to say yes. But there's ways and means to find out. I mean, you verify things, you investigate. God's given us eyes, ears, and brains to verify information. I mean, especially in today's age, right? When things can be faked, someone can send you an AI-generated video of your neighbor doing something horrendous, and you expect to believe it just by looking at the video, definitely it's going to be misleading, right? So you have to investigate, depending on the circumstance, what it is and how go about investigating and proving something, So, but this is important, right? It is important for us, and there's a reason why the messenger has said it's crucial, because people can be really misled very easily into doing things that they shouldn't otherwise be doing if they knew what they were doing was wrong, right? But you shall use your brain and verify things before you accept them, right? So verse 37 says, you shall not walk proudly on earth, you cannot bore through the earth, nor can you be as tall as the mountains. All bad behavior is condemned by your Lord. So obviously we cannot be arrogant show-offs and egotistical people. We have to remember that we are human beings, and we know, like, this earth that we're on, it's not a very good place to be right now. We're not in a very favorable position to be left on this planet. I mean, we're in a really precarious situation, and we have to be extremely careful in every step we take. And so knowing who you really are is important, right? God says you cannot be as tall as the mountains. I mean, if you think about that, how tall are these mountains? The mountains are like thousands thousands of meters above the ground, right? Huge, you know. Look at some other mountain ranges and how tall those mountains are above the sea level. And those are creatures made by God, and they have souls. Now, and I'm saying when I say they have souls like trees have souls, plants have souls, mountains are submitters that have souls, like God says in the Quran about David, that the mountains glorified with him, and the mountains refuse to bear the responsibility. So imagine the mountains are so huge, probably one of the largest creatures on Earth, right? I mean, Earth itself being a submitter, but then the mountains being, on Earth, the biggest creatures that we know of, right? And we cannot be as tall as the mountains, but even the mountains don't have the kind of egos that the human beings have, and God says you cannot be as tall as the mountains. So it's something that we should think about, and you cannot bore through the earth, right? So, basically just, keep your ego in check, right? This is something, and remember who you are. Don't be all high and mighty in yourself, thinking you're invincible, or thinking you're this great person, and have this grandiose view of yourself. All these things lead people astray, as we know, and lead to unhappiness, most importantly, right? I mean, if you want to be happy, kill your ego, and don't be arrogant. Don't walk proudly. Whatever it is that you feel you have, is all from God, and God can take it whenever He wants. So don't be like that, and be at your best behavior. I mean, this is something that God wants us to do. To be kind to people, and be humble. A lot of times, people try to put up a face, may try to put up a face, may try to have some, idea of fake righteousness, but God knows exactly what's in people's hearts, and actions speak louder than words. And this is why we're here, right? We're tested by our actions, and God knows, our true qualities, and God exposes them by putting us in different situations, right? And so this is something that we have to be mindful of. Verse 39, Quran is wisdom. This is some of the wisdom inspired to you by your Lord. You shall not set up another God beside God, lest you end up in Gehenna, blamed and defeated. So we see that in this verse especially, we know that God says Quran is wisdom. And this subtitle is important because people believe that, some people believe that the wisdom is the hadith, and the Quran is just God's revelations. I mean, they might acknowledge that, but then they specifically use wisdom for, Muhammad's hearsay that they think our words and actions refer to him, for example, right? But we know here, based on this verse, that this Quran is wisdom, the true wisdom that is inspired to Muhammad by God, right? So this is true wisdom. And then God tells us to not set up another God beside God. I mean, that God can be your ego, it can be Prophet Muhammad, it can be some saints, it can be your spouse, it can be anything, right? So we have to be careful, lest you end up in Gehenna blamed and sorry. So obviously, God willing, none of us end up in that place, and so we should remember that. Verse 40, has your Lord given you boys while giving himself the angels as daughters? How could you utter such a blasphemy? We have cited in this Quran all kinds of examples that they may take heed, but it only augments their aversion. Say, if there were any other gods beside him as they claim, they would have tried to overthrow the possessor of the throne. Be he glorified, he is much too exalted, far above their utterances. So these are people who fabricate lies about God and attribute angels as daughters of God. And then God says, okay, you want sons for yourself, you don't consider daughters to be as good as sons, and then you ascribe God as having daughters, I mean, that's not even logical. First of all, God doesn't need any daughters uh, or sons. I mean, that's for reproducing humans or people on earth. I mean, God doesn't do that, you know. So, but you know, you're also ascribing partners to God. I mean, obviously, God doesn't need any partners, and and God says He has cited in this Quran all kinds of examples, but it only increases their aversion, right? So, I mean, that's quite extraordinary, right? People read the same book, but then some people, this amazing book, you know, leads them to righteousness, leads them to light, leads them to guidance. And for other people, it's just, they're just going down the wrong path, you know. No matter what, you know, if you give them the purest translation of the Quran authorized by God with the mathematical miracle, and they still cannot make it. Imagine, right? So but for most people, they have the wrong information, anyways. But for people who have the right information, there's people obviously that will be averse to it just by rejecting it, also, right? But then there's people who accept it, but then they twist the meaning and create innovations and go down the wrong path, you know, spread misinformation, and they will be misled in that way, right? And it increases their wickedness, increases their aversion, because the Quran is the Iliyin and the Sijin, right? We know that two mathematically structured books, like two divine books, you know, and one leads you to righteousness, other leads you astray, depending on which path you're supposed to be on, right? So, I mean, this is truly amazing, subhanAllah, you know. And God says, also, if there's, you know, for people who believe that God can have partners or there could be multiple gods, you know, this is something that they should ponder on, that if there were other gods, then there should have been some sort of immunity or some sort of chaos between the two gods or multiple gods, you know. But we understand that there's absolute harmony in God's creation, you know, how you can see the planets and the stars and the trees and all the elements in nature, they're all in complete harmony and total submission to God. And so if there was something like that, I mean, let's say there was a god of fire or something, and then there was some other god, I mean, then the god of fire could have rebelled against the other gods, and maybe he would have taken out the fire or something like that, right? And had a war with the other gods. But none of that exists. We know that because there's only one God, and that's the truth. And verse 43 says, "Be he glorified, he is much too exalted, far above their utterances." Verse 44, "Everything glorifies God. Glorifying him are the seven universes, the earth, and everyone in them. There's nothing that does not glorify him. But you do not understand their glorification. He is clement, forgiver." So this is another beautiful verse where God is informing us that everything in the heavens and the earth glorifies God, but we don't understand their glorification. Now, even the bodies of the disbelievers, even the rocks, you know, even the things that we think has nothing attractive about them, right? They're all glorifying God, right? But we don't understand in what shape or form that's glorifying God. I mean, you look at a rock and it just looks like a rock. But if you go into it, what makes it a rock, you know, is all the elements in nature that are following the design of God that makes it a rock, right? Because there's rocks, there's other things. I mean, why they're all different, right? And they're all following specific laws of God, and they're in total submission to God. So these are all things that are glorifying God. I mean, we look at, and you know, they're glorifying God's design and his engineering, his amazing omniscience, right? And these are the things that, you know, this is why, like, when we reflect on those creations, it helps us come closer to God, because we begin to appreciate, you know, those things, right? I mean, everything we see in nature, like I just mentioned, even the rocks, there's so much in it that we don't see with our naked eye, but you know, God, there's so much happening. Like, God has put a balance of everything, right? So, I mean, there's amazing glorification happening. I mean, if we even understood, like, we think everything is a miracle in itself, right? Which it is in the sense that, you know, none of the human beings could ever accomplish anything of that magnitude with the perfect balance that God has created, and you know, so we don't understand their glorification, and God says He's clement, forgiver. He's absolutely very kind and forgiving. You know, He overlooks a lot of our sins. Um, Mashallah. So disbelievers cannot understand the Quran. Verse 45 says, "When you read the Quran, we place between you and those who do not believe in the hereafter an invisible barrier." Quran, the only source. We place shields around their minds to prevent them from understanding it, and deafness in their ears. And when you preach your Lord using the Quran alone, they run away in aversion. You know, so this is important. They run away in aversion. And the footnote says, the Arabic word alone refers to God in 770, 39, 45, 40, 12, and 84, and 64. If you add these numbers, we get 361, or 19 times 19. But if you include 1746, which refers to the Quran, the product is not a multiple of 19. Alone, therefore, refers to the Quran in 1746. So everywhere the word alone is mentioned, it refers to God throughout the Quran. But this is the only place where alone is mentioned where it's referring to the Quran alone. And everywhere else, when the word alone is mentioned, it adds up to be 361, or 19 times 19. So based on that, as it says in the footnote, it refers to the Quran alone. So this is really important. God says disbelievers cannot understand the Quran. When you read the Quran, God places a barrier between these people because they cannot stand to be preached with the Quran alone. I mean, why is it important for us? Is it relevant? First of all, is it relevant for us now that we're submitters? Okay, you know, because we have come to the conclusion that Quran alone is our only source of guidance, right? But then we see people falling off the path, right? So there is a reason a lot of people fall off the path, because they still truly don't believe that the Quran is our only source of guidance, right? We saw the circumcisionists, for example, right? Even after they accepted that the Quran alone is the only source of guidance, they still wanted to hold on to the man-made injections in the Bible and the traditions from their parents, right? And they failed the test as a result of that, right? So we have to accept that we cannot take this lightly. And the devil can very easily trick people into thinking that they're upholding the Quran alone as a source of guidance, right? So, and what happens as a result of that? You know, as a result, you no longer have access to the Quran. You no longer have access to the heart of the guidance that was coming to you from God, right? So you wanted to get more information by going to other sources, thinking there's more that you can get out of it. You know, now you lost the main source, right? And now what happens? You know, these people are left in the dark. They're confused. You know, they're like blind people, right? I mean, no offense to anybody who's blind, you know, but meaning that you cannot see things, you cannot distinguish things. You lose your understanding. You lose the ability to be able to distinguish, right? And so it's important, right? I mean, we know, for example, as submitters, that God sent the Quran, right? Muhammad was sent with the Quran alone. He preached with the Quran alone. But what happened? After that, people started making hearsay, and people started making laws and nonsense about God and lies about Muhammad and God. You know, would there be things in the hadith books you think that Muhammad may have actually said, or said some part of it? Maybe, you know. And it's possible that some of it could have been taken out of context. Some of it could have been twisted, exaggerated, and then you have something that's total nonsense, right? But whatever the case is, we understand that the Quran is our only source of guidance, right? It's our only source, everything that we need to know for our salvation is in the Quran. So, you know, the thing is that if you want to look for understanding of what is in the Quran, you can refer to the audios, videos. Um, it's totally fine. But if you are looking at the audios and videos, but you don't understand that the Quran is your only source of guidance and only source of law, and you're looking for things because your belief is not there, you're going to find things that are just going to be taken out of context. And then you're going to see verses in the Quran that are trying to explain to you, like, really, this is the context in which the messenger said something is this, because obviously he has said it in context of the Quran, right? But the fact that you are not even certain yourself that the Quran is your only source of guidance, you've lost access to the Quran, you're gonna interpret the words of the messenger and the audios and videos in isolation from the Quran. Because even if you look at the Quran, you cannot see, because you think that the Quran, you're not satisfied with the Quran alone as your only source of guidance, right? So now, when you even look at the audios and videos, you're still gonna be misguided, right? Not to discourage anybody from listening to the audios and videos, because people take the Quran out of context too. But obviously, these are the same kinds of people, the same category of people, because these are the people who, for them, the Quran is not enough. If the Quran was enough for them, they would not take the Quran out of context either, because they would have access to the Quran, right? And now these other people, they don't have access to the Quran too, because they're looking for things. I mean, I've been with these people also, similar people, where they went so deep, in these other things, trying to look for laws, right? So the messenger doesn't bring any new laws. Everything is in the Quran, is extracted from the Quran, right? So you have to accept that first, But people come up with things that are not in the Quran, and then they say, "Yeah, well, the messenger said it," and the messenger never said any of those things that they think they said, But they're just hallucinating, right? And so again, that doesn't mean that people shouldn't watch the audios or watch the videos. They should. It teaches them a lot, but it teaches them what's in the Quran, from the information that is in the Quran. Please remember that. And when you look at the audios and videos, remember that it's in accordance with what is explained in the Quran. And even people look at the audios and videos, or even in the Quran, and then they just say things that are not true. But in a nutshell, that shows that people don't have guidance, because they don't truly believe in the hereafter, because they're not satisfied with the Quran alone. They're somehow misled, right? But all these things are only helpful for people who know that the Quran is your only source of guidance. It's so important. It cannot be stressed. I mean, the messenger of the covenant dedicated his entire life as a messenger, preaching this to us. So we better get this down if we want to make it to paradise, because if you don't, I mean, that's idol worship, right? Idol worship is an unforgivable offense. If you feel that there's another source besides the Quran as a source of law, then you're being misled. Verse 47 says, "We're fully aware of what they hear when they listen to you. And when they conspire secretly, the disbelievers say, 'You're following a crazy man.' Note how they describe you and how this causes them to stray off the path." So, I mean, this is important. I mean, the disbelievers, they secretly conspire, first of all, and they listen to you also, which is also interesting. But they say you're following a crazy man, right? Like, they think it's ridiculous. And this could apply to Muhammad, but it could apply to the believers as well. God says, "Note how they describe you and how this causes them to stray off the path." So this is something that, is a common trait of the disbelievers, I mean, they mischaracterize the messenger because they did not accept his teachings, and it causes them to go astray further. They said, verse 49, they said, after we turn into bones and fragments, we get resurrected anew. Say, even if you turn into rocks, oh my God, I'm running behind. They said, after we turn into bones and fragments, we get resurrected anew. Say, even if you turn into rocks or iron, even if you turn into any kind of creation that you deem impossible, they will then say, who will bring us back? Say, the one who created you in the first place. They will then shake their heads and say, when will that be? Say, it may be closer than you think. The day he summons you, you will respond by praising him, and you will then realize that you had lasted in this life but a short while. Treat each other amicably. Tell my servants to treat each other in the best possible manner, for the devil will always try to drive a wedge among them. Surely the devil is man's most ardent enemy. Your Lord knows you best. According to his knowledge, he may shower you with his mercy, or he may requite you. We did not send you to be their advocate. Your Lord is the best knower of everyone in the heavens and the earth. In accordance with his knowledge, we preferred some prophets over others. For example, we gave David the Psalms. Say, implore whatever idols you have set up beside him. They have no power to relieve your afflictions, nor can they prevent them. The righteous idols worship God alone. Even the idols that they implore are seeking the ways and means towards their Lord. They pray for his mercy and fear his retribution. Surely the retribution of your Lord is dreadful. There is not a community that we will not annihilate before the day of resurrection or inflict severe retribution upon them. This is already written down in the book. Inshallah. So, just real quick, I know kind of short on time here. And so, God tells us that even if we turn into rocks or any kind of creation that we think is impossible, God will still bring us out. It's easy for God to do. And then we are also reminded to treat each other amicably, because the devil will always try to drive a wedge among the believers, right? So we have to try our best to treat each other in the best possible manner, right? And so just to be clear, this refers to the believers treating each other in the best possible manner. And at the same time, we are supposed to be harsh and stern when it comes to the disbelievers, to make sure nobody's confused about these verses. But for it's talking about my servants, tell my servants to treat each other in the best possible manner, for the devil will always try to drive a wedge among them, right? So it's important for the believers to treat each other in the best possible manner, because Satan doesn't want the believers to be together, and he wants them to be divided, and he wants to drive a wedge among them. So, and why does he want to drive a wedge? Because it's harder for him to lead them astray when they're together in a bunch, right? So he wants to separate them. And I mean, that's a strategy in war or anything. It's a common strategy when you want to destroy the enemy. You would prefer if they're not united, so you can go after them and kill them one by one, for example, right? And so it's a same strategy that Satan uses. So he isolates them, so they break away from the group, and then they come up, and it's easy for him to just lead them astray, come up with their own ideas, and just go astray from there on. So we have to be careful about that. And then and God says finally, even the righteous idols, like people that they idolize besides God, and all these prophets and messengers, they worship God alone, and they worship God alone when they were here, and they still worship God alone. And God says there's not a community that we will not annihilate before the day of resurrection or inflict severe persecution upon them. This is already written down in the book. So all these communities that we see in this world, God says there's not a single community that eventually is not getting annihilated, right? Before the day of resurrection, or inflict severe persecution upon them, because this is God's system. When people are hopelessly stuck in their disbelief, eventually they're annihilated, and this is because their test is over. They fail the test. There's no point in for them to just live at this point, and because they've already failed, and it's time for them to be annihilated, because if they're even left, they'll just cause more damage to others, and they're deserving to be annihilated at that point. So with this, God willing, I'll end. If you guys have any comments or questions, please feel free. Thank you.
MashaAllah, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to add something, brother. It's about the thing that you said, that the Prophet Muhammad, it was forbidden for him to try to explain the Quran. So, like all these hadiths that are talking about the Prophet saying this and that about the Quran, like they are 100% fake, because we know for sure that, and the Messenger explains this right in the interview, that he says it was forbidden for him to even try to explain the Quran, or talk about any religious thing which is not like when the Prophet is talking, he can talk only about the Quran, actually, right? If they come up with any questions, and if God already answered these questions by sending new revelations to the Prophet, right? So that is one thing, and the other thing is, this doesn't. It is not the same for example, Dr. Rashad, right? Because his job was to explain certain things, and to because there were some secrets in the Quran, and then bring them into the light. So most of the times, these people, they when they argue, they talk about, okay, why is it forbidden for Muhammad to explain the Quran, while Rashad is saying new things. So that is the thing where they go astray, basically, and we can clearly see that they have difficulties understanding the differences, right? Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
what
I
I
mean,
wanted to add, brother.
the thing is, Muhammad's message was the Quran itself, right? So this was what was given to him, and if people even asked him like about this or that, God gave him the verses to tell people, right? So he would just give them those verses, right? But what happens to what is the role of other messengers, right? Who, as Muhammad was the final prophet, they did not have a scripture. I mean, for example, Dr. Khalifa doesn't have a scripture, so he is just meant to give the information out of the Quran, which is all, but it's already in the Quran, right? We know that. But obviously the example I was giving was of people who don't understand that the messenger of, I mean, who don't truly believe that his job was to give clarifications of things that are already in the Quran, right? It's not about things that he can like get some independent thing that is not from the Quran, right? The information that given to him as a messenger was all from the Quran, right? So for example, the age of 40 was from the Quran. It was revealed to him that this is, like you said, the
Zakat too.
secrets,
Yeah.
right? So mashallah, we know that. And but for example, we recently had the discussion where somebody says that you are your your admission test is not going to go on for more than 5 years. Let's say, like, they made up a law that your admission test is not going to go, even though there is no specific law that says 5 years max, right? And the messenger of the covenant didn't say it either. Messenger of the covenant said, usually it takes about 5 years, right? Which is like an estimate, meaning naturally that it could take longer for some people, right? But it's so easy for someone to not believe that the Quran alone is not enough as your source of guidance, that you think that the messenger can make up a law, like come up with a number like 5 years max, right? When someone says usually 5 years is different from saying 5 years absolutely max, right? Like, so the messenger didn't say that. But imagine if a messenger did say that, then where would that be coming from, right? That's not in the Quran, right? So that means they look it up as a law that is not in the Quran, right? There's no law in the Quran that says a 5 year max, right? And so things like that, it's so easy for people, you know. Like for example, I also gave you this other example of I think in a previous study when I was in this other congregation in the past, where there was a time when the messenger and the people had to change their qibla a little bit to accommodate everyone that was in there, right? It was an exceptional situation. They were in a very tight spot, and they had to move a little bit in order for everybody to be able to fit inside that room, and they prayed slightly away from the Qibla, and the messenger said it was okay in that situation. Now that they made this up into a law and started praying in the other direction because they said the messenger did it, right? In a masjid where they had plenty of room, right? So, but they said no, the messenger did, we can do it, and obviously taking it out of context, right? But if they understood that the messenger cannot do that because he only explains things from the Quran, and then Quran multiple times you're told no, you have to face the Qibla, make sure you face the Qibla. I mean, it's over and over, it's repeated, right, in the same surah, and so the messenger is not going to say anything other than what is already in the Quran. So they would have not come up with this kind of absurd idea, but I saw certain people, following in those footsteps, basically, very, very similar. So,
Yeah, brother, it's also a way of
yeah.
it's also a way, it's kind of a system of God to expose, to
Mm-hmm.
expose people.
Of
Like
course.
there have to happen things, things need to happen for them to be exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Like in this example, it's the change of the qibla, or
Mm-hmm.
in another example, it's about intoxications, or
Mm-hmm. Right,
um,
right, right.
yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yes,
So in a way, God is still arranging everything, and He uses
amazing system.
these
God's
systems. Yeah.
system is amazing. Yeah, subhanAllah.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to say that for people, to not be discouraged by these certain types of events. When like, uh, I mean, you can look at it two ways. Obviously, excuse me. Like the thing is, for example, like we understand that um, Satan wants to divide the believers and everything, right? And he wants to cause division. And from one angle, if you look at it, it's kind of sad. It's like sad in the way that humans decide to go to hell, right? And God sees it, but it's something that they already deserved. But then also, uh, something that is meant in accordance with God's will, right? And so also coming to the congregation with the believers, right? When you see this sort of thing happening, and the message of the covenant, I believe, also talked about this, right? It says it's a sifting process, right? That is healthy, actually, So, um, it's something that obviously would is what God wants for people to have, in order for the believers not to get polluted, and being able to understand the Word of God and not be misguided and misled, or promote, un-Quranic ideas. So God's system is perfect, subhanAllah.
It reminds me of those two examples in the Quran. Where the metal, it's heated, and that
Mm-hmm.
which stays down to the ground, which stays humble,
Right,
it's
right.
but the waste goes to the top like foam, right? And becomes
Mm-hmm.
nothing. So, or the turbulence of the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
The pure water stays down to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the foam
Mm-hmm.
rises to the top, and that's the waste, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
God's system is seen everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
God
MashaAllah.
willing, we adhere to the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
We humble ourselves before what God has dictated for us, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not by our own intuition or our own
Mm-hmm.
opinions, which can get us into trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously. Um, One thing I'd love to mention is the extravagance that you had mentioned in the verses prior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you can have this sense of trying to be better or trying to exalt yourself, um, and then you extravagantly give charity, right? We all know it's obligatory. However, to be extravagant with it is also a sin, right? And I always think of the airplane. When you go on an airplane, they say you got to put a mask on yourself before you can help anybody else, because
Mm-hmm.
if you pass out or whatever, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. And I think that's kind of the source of that too, right? If we're a community that helps each other out and gives to charity as a source of um, obligation, right? Uh, we have to do it in a way that isn't extravagant, but in a way where we just recognize that it's not our money to even deal with, right? It's God's money out of a portion that He gave to us to distribute to you know the families or the traveling aliens or the orphans, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
When we say obligation, right, we're not talking about the obligatory charity, right? Because that's the charity that we have to give. The charity that is being talked about is the extra charity on top of it, because that depends on however much you want to give, right? The obligatory is 2.5, and you can be extravagant with that. That's something that you have to give, but the rest is not obligatory, right? It's totally optional.
So maybe I'm a little confused about this, and my apologies.
Hmm. No worries.
Is the 2.5, like, I've always seen it as like the bare minimum, like that is the absolute minimum you can give. However, the excess is kind of the extreme, right? Like, make sure that it doesn't fall like a make sure that it doesn't burden you. However, the excess, as in, like, you know there's a little wiggle room, you can give a little bit more, and then you give it more. Am I correct in that understanding, or God willing, I'll be put
So
in the right direction?
yeah, so the 2.5% charity is something that we have to give on the day of harvest, right? When we get paid, right? So and all the other charity you can give at any time. So basically, I like to see them as two separate things in my head. I don't necessarily combine it, but yeah, if you want to give more, you can give more on the day of harvest too, um, right? So I'm trying to understand the part that you said was confusing. So your question, can you repeat your question?
You know, it's okay, brother. I confuse myself sometimes. Yeah, brother John said, "Do not be excessive of extra even." Yeah, like that's exactly what I was thinking too, John. Right? I always looked at it as like 2.5 is the bare minimum. Like, that's the
Mm-hmm.
speed limit, right? Like, you
Right.
can't go under, right?
Right.
Whereas, of course, if we have excess and notice that, like, the excess would be the limit. So you can't go past the excess, and you can't go under the 2.5. So
Right.
there's that middle ground, right? And I've always saw it as like, give as much as you can as long as it's within the excess, right?
Mm-hmm.
But don't be extravagant about it, right? Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a show off situation where you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
look at me, look how great I am, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's God has given you this extra to give to your family, to the orphans, to charity, right? And that's obligation. However, as mentioned prior to the extravagance, like, you don't want to burden yourself to the point where you can't help yourself even, because that's not the point of the charity, right? It's not to burden yourself. God has made religion easy, obviously. So, yeah, that's kind of where I was kind of going with it. Like, am I incorrect in my thinking with that, or?
I don't know. I think that sounds about right. I was just confused when you said it's obligatory because, like, I don't see the obligatory and the non-obligatory. I mean, I see them as separate, right? So I was thinking, well, you can't be extravagant with the obligatory because that's 2.5. The obligatory is 2.5, right? So that is totally separate. In other words.
So the giving of charity, you've kind of separated into two categories.
Yeah, so even if you look at like the Arabic word, right? I mean, you have the zakat, which is a separate word for obligatory charity, right? And then you have the other charity that's it's a different word, right? So there are two different types of charities basically. So, but you have to give the obligatory charity, but then any other charity you can give whenever, right? But the fact that I guess there are two separate words to describe each one of them. I always like to look at them as two separate things. That
Oh,
makes
okay.
sense.
Yeah, like as an English speaker.
Right. Yeah, I can see. I
Charity,
can.
charity, brother.
Right.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Do not be excessive of in giving to charity. Even right. I mean, you can't. You obviously should not be excessive in your on your own spending either, right? You have to spend in moderation. But then also when it comes to spending to charity, even spending in the cause of God, right? I mean, you cannot neglect um, the things that are essential for you and your family.
I also want to continue in terms of the conversation with the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you'd mentioned how the mountains, how like I tried looking for it beforehand, but it was ironic. There's a saying where it's like, even the mountains, in their great grandeur and how large they are, allowed a goat to stand on top of it, and then the goat is a lot larger. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it makes me think, back to the example of the foam that goes to the top. No matter how great or big or anything that you may think you are, really at the end of the day, you're going to be dust, right? And we're all resurrected to
Mm-hmm.
be equivalent, right? So, regardless of how we look, we gotta humble ourselves and understand that
Mm-hmm.
no matter how much we battle ourselves or our egos, or we change for the better. It's like it doesn't make us any better. It just you know that's for our own betterment. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's it. It's not
Exactly.
for yeah. That's it. Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make you any better as a person. It's just like okay, good for you.
Mm-hmm.
You progressed of not being to your own detriment. You're an asset to yourself. You're not a liability,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's a huge thing to look at for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you can be an asset to yourself or an ass. As in a donkey.
Uh, the donkey's voice, right? It even says in the Quran, nobody
Yeah,
wants to be a donkey.
right.
just because there's silence.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big thing that we have to understand too, as a community who comes together and studies the Quran, is we actively volunteer to remind each other of how we are wrong. Right? We can be tunnel visioned. We can
Mm-hmm.
be blinded by the world and how we see things.
Right.
And the whole goal of finding a community that has the common goal is it's like a litmus test, right?
Mm-hmm.
We see other examples of followers, and sometimes we fall short of doing things correctly. And God willing, the community helps us align our goals along with the teachings of the Quran, right? And sometimes you're blindsided; you don't know what is correct, and the whole goal of a community is to hold you accountable. Or at least that's how I see it. And though it's difficult and the truth can hurt many, many, many times,
Mm-hmm.
um, that is the goal of having a community,
Mm-hmm.
a strong community where it's like it's not about feelings, it's about the common goal of
Mm-hmm.
yeah, submitting to God, which
Mm-hmm.
is not an easy task, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean it's good to be corrected. I mean, I would prefer to be corrected if I'm wrong about something, than be told I'm right and praised while I'm wrong. And I mean, it's just common sense for us to know. This is why we're here in this world. We're here to learn. We come to the Quran studies to learn. I mean, just because I have given 20 talks or whatever amount on the Quran doesn't mean I'm an expert and have the knowledge. I mean, I can still be wrong about things. So, this is a study where we come to learn. And if if I feel that it hurts my ego that if someone corrects me, and even if I'm wrong, to the point that even if I'm wrong and I have a hard time accepting it, it basically I'm just feeding my ego further, right? In that situation. So it definitely, I guess, I mean, killing our egos, that's why one of the most important commandments. And I mean, if I mean, there's common people on the street that are disbelievers, and they can do a pretty good job, like in handling some of these things, right? But I see that when people become submitters, sometimes they get some knowledge as they read more Quran. Um, some people, they don't, obviously, because of whatever reason, they're not deserving to be guided. It actually feeds into their ego. Because they're looking for, I don't know, they're looking for some kind of recognition, and or something like that. So it become so I see that the more time they spend reading the Quran, the harder it becomes for them to realize that they could be wrong and to be corrected. You know, it's like when a child is born. The ego is small, and then the ego grows as the child grows. And the jinn also, his ego also grows with it, right? And the person's ego also grows. And as the person becomes older and older, and too, I mean, the ego, it becomes harder and harder for them to kill their ego, right?
Uh, it could be validation, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
just looking personally,
Mm-hmm.
like it's not. I wouldn't say it's not difficult, but it's not easy, right? Like you constantly like I think the more you read and the more and I'm speaking from my own experience, so I don't know how it is for anybody else. But like I feel like the more I read and the more I understand, the more that companion of mine is louder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you tend to hear it becomes like a stark contrast. There's no more gray area. It's very
Mm-hmm.
black and white. And
Mm-hmm.
do you understand what I mean by that? Like, hopefully, I'm not alone on that. And then,
Sorry, can you repeat
because
that?
it's so difficult, like you want validation.
Validation,
You
right,
want
right.
You know what I mean? Because like
Mm-hmm.
it's constantly a test now. Because like you see, like it's no longer you're just going through life now. Like it's more apparent, more so than ever, that life is a test, and
Mm-hmm.
everything you're doing is a test. And because it has that weight, you want validation for that you're doing a good job. You know,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what I mean? Like so, like it's like your ego wants a fill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when anytime you get a hit of
Yeah.
ego, like
Mm-hmm.
it hurts even more. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
they're and I mean I guess they're using it as a platform for praise and validation rather than a platform for self improvement and growth, right?
Because it almost feels sometimes like kicking a horse while it's down, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you already know there's many, like I don't know about you guys, but like there's many times in life where like I'm I'm much more self-critical than I was beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be very difficult, right? Well, sometimes you just want to win and you want to be like, okay, I'm doing this one thing right. Well, that's the foam, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking for validation from people, that's the wrong people you're looking for, right? Like that's the wrong validation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's where the ego kind of sets it
Mm-hmm.
apart. I could be wrong, but like,
Yeah, I
do you
mean
see what I'm saying?
all dignity belongs to God, right? And God grants it to whomever He wills, and if you deserve to be praised or reprimanded, you know, it's based on your actions, right? And so people shouldn't be looking for praise and validation and stroking their egos. So, and if you and like I don't know how to explain this, but like let's say you go to work and your boss says some good things about you. God is controlling it, right? And God wanted you to hear it, let's say, right? At the same time, let's say, I mean, you are saying wrong things, right? And someone reminds you over and over and over, and you keep insisting, right? The messenger of the covenant explains it too. He says, if I see you falling in the ditch, I'm gonna tell you nicely, hey, you watch out, you're falling in the ditch, right? And he gives that example, and it's then you see him walk closer and closer, right? Then I don't want to butcher how he said it, but eventually I'm gonna. This is my version of it. Eventually, you're gonna grab the person by the neck, like, hey, you're gonna fall in the ditch, like, be careful, right? But even then, the person doesn't care. He says, no, just like, I don't like your tone.
Right, or they get mad at it. They say you're
They go
snarky
to
or
the
something
ditch.
when it's right. Yeah, and it's not that. It's like you know, um, if you figuratively speaking, right, you raise your voice. Like I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
example he gave, he said you're gonna go in the ditch, and then they turn and look at you and get mad at you for doing
How
something.
dare you
But
grab my neck
I'm,
or my hand?
right, yeah, it's like yes, I mean people insist and people.
Yeah,
I mean, people choose to want to, I guess,
mm-hmm.
feel hurt about something or, think
Yeah.
think
I
that
remember there
way.
was. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, no, I was finished.
Yeah, I remember there's this one audio where there's a lot of commotion with the messenger, and someone says, we should put a sign here at the door, or something. Leave your ego outside
Leave
or
your
something.
egos at yeah, because I mean, if you look at what's at stake, it's like even it's just not worth it. The
Mm-hmm.
ego's not anybody's friend. It
Yep.
sucks, and
Yes.
I mean, I can count many times where it's like I've been corrected about things. Just in various situations, and I think back, it's like, well, it's better to, uh, not let go of my ego
Mm-hmm.
and try to make it into heaven, the end goal, than hang on to my ego and end up in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not gonna have it either way. You're not gonna have your ego wherever. If you there's no such thing as having an ego. You know, um,
In God's
You
kingdom,
know,
yeah.
and in hell, there's no such thing as that. So it's like, okay, if you can't hold on to it in the hereafter, then it's just get rid of it now. But it's something. It's something difficult. Like a little situation even happened yesterday. Somebody, just the way they spoke to me at work, and they didn't know what I was doing or what but they pulled up on me, and they asked me, can I help you? And then it was they were actually kind of like I was at a facility, and it was my facility that I was in charge of and running,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't know that. But I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, it sometimes happens before, but I could have chosen to take offense to it. Like the first
Mm-hmm.
part of me like wanted to and be like, "Excuse me, you're on my," I was really feeling like that. But then I just kind of looked at him puzzled, and I said, "Look, I'm with so and so company. Like this is my
Mm-hmm.
route and facility." Then he was, and I thought about it afterward, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
man, you can see
Mm-hmm.
you can see how people's egos are, like even self-reflecting, and like
Mm-hmm.
what initially I wanted to respond with, because I felt, but then it's like that's nothing good would have come out of it. It's sinful to be like that. And then even and you remember what. So even if he was talking to me a certain way, like, let's just say maybe like kind of like the messenger had pointed out one time, maybe like God is running everything, so that could have, been, that was just in accordance with the way things were happening, and you know, responding to being suspicious of this person and thinking he's talking to me that way is another sin,
Mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to, or if he was making kind of a face, I have a puzzle face, like what if he was just looking like that, or what if it
Mm-hmm.
just sounded like that and he wasn't, and here I am
What if his
making
face was just like that naturally?
smug. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of was, but like he was probably happy on the inside. He was just doing, doing
Mm-hmm.
his job. And
Mm-hmm.
like I'm sitting here looking into it because I felt hurt,
Mm-hmm.
delving deeper into it than
Mm-hmm.
what it needed to be. So yeah,
Yeah,
mashallah,
so
it's like
exactly. I mean, in those situations, we have no excuse, right? We have to try to be, it's really, really good. I think it's a really good exercise for our egos, and I think
yes.
I don't want to say it's
Hmm.
the easiest thing. It is still difficult, but I think if you really think about it, like it's like a low hanging fruit, you know, um, really, because you know exactly what you need to do. I mean, it's not that easy, but just be nice at that point. You're getting so many points for that, right? God says none can attain this except those who are extremely fortunate. Um, but like, but your natural tendency is to be upset, right? And you're going against it, right? But also like, when you think about being corrected when it comes to religion, if you're really here to learn about God and worship God alone, like, shouldn't it be that if you when you find out that you're wrong about something and you truly realize you're wrong about it, like, your response, at least after finding out that you were wrong, at least maybe just not in the moment, let's say even afterwards, is to, and that's how, I mean, I can say that, mashallah, that's what I've done, is every time I someone corrects me, I go and I thank that person. You know why? Because I realize that it's so important for me to not be stuck in some kind of a wrong belief, right? I'll be happy, even if the person was rude to me, I'll still be thankful and feel obliged to thank him for correcting me because I know it's for my salvation, right? Um, so so yeah, I mean, that's kind of that is important. I mean, definitely when it comes to your ego, right? But imagine even at that time you cannot kill your ego. That's very bad. That's really, really bad. And you're looking for excuses to uh, not be appreciative at that point. And so Yeah, it just reminds me on how some of these people end up leaving because they were being corrected. So yeah, I mean, I would love to be corrected if I'm wrong about something in my understanding, because I that's why I'm here. You know, I'm studying this Quran because also not just because I want to be corrected. I want to be reminded of God. I want to be reminded of God's revelations. But also, if I have a misunderstanding about something, like, I like to be corrected. You guys remember when we were having this discussion actually recently, not too long ago, about the station of Abraham, right? I realized I was wrong, right? And I thanked the person
Russia,
for it.
Russia.
I said thank you for sticking to your guns. Remember?
Speaking, yeah, I remember that
Yeah.
statement. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
it was a genuine, like gratefulness to
yeah,
like, okay,
exactly.
I'm
Well, I mean,
glad
why
you
shouldn't we be
stuck
grateful?
to it.
Because, if I let's say I have this wrong understanding and I said it to other people or whatnot, and I mean, this one was not such a big deal, but there could be other situations where it's a big deal, and I have the understanding and I'm not
Hmm.
corrected. I mean, it could really lead me astray, and so it is really important that that I understand that what happened here was that God helped me by this person to be corrected about something. I'd be happy to correct it, rather than fight it, especially after, like, verses are being presented, and you know in your heart that you can't win this argument, but you just keep on fighting it, and any points that validate the other point of view, you just kind of just like let it you know pass over your head and just dodge them, as if you never heard it, right? God says, who are further astray than those who are reminded of God's revelations, and they insist on their ways and as if they never heard them, right? So we don't want to be that like that.
It's understandable, however, like I can understand why people are so defensive. Like speaking from experience,
Mm-hmm.
um, because like you've based decisions off of lies you've accepted in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Because you assumed at that point that it was truth, so you made a decision that furthered it along. Do you understand what I mean? So you like now it's if you're going to change that, it changes everything you've done in the past based off of that lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a heavy thing to accept, right? Like you've made decisions based off of a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like it's a big hit to the ego. But
Mm-hmm.
like you'd mentioned prior, it's better to reconcile it now than on the day of judgment. That's for sure,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like
For sure.
accept the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you've been wrong this time, but like thank
Mm-hmm.
God, like you're
Mm-hmm.
only 30, 40 years old, right? So
Mm-hmm.
at least you're not doing it on your deathbed, right? When
Mm-hmm.
it's too late, right? So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Masha, I think I found out that the oldest person in our group is Brother Salim.
Brother who?
Salim.
Suleman. Oh,
Salim, have been
mashallah.
sharing the mathematical findings
Oh
recently.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, he might not be the
Mashallah.
oldest one, but I think the oldest active participant, I would say,
Hmm.
in our group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you were mentioning about the low hanging fruit, like
Mm-hmm.
kind of how or like these little examples, like because those are I think I understand what you were saying because like when stuff like that happens, like immediately as soon as it's something like that happens or pops off, it's like I know immediately it's a like okay, you could either fail this really bad or you could like respond
Mm-hmm.
good and use I guess the knowledge of submission and all that like
Mm-hmm.
to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
like another situation happened like a few nights ago, and I actually like I guess I kind of messed up, but like I was really really sorry afterwards, and I was so it was something simple I guess, but it's exactly like as soon as it happened I knew what it was, and it was so basically for one of the assignments I'm working on, like it involved ChatGPT, and then I went to save and submit something in a previous chat that I was supposed to, gather and scrape the chat history, and then somehow I messed it up where it deleted the whole chat conversation, and
Mm-hmm.
now no longer I had to reproduce. There's no way I could reproduce that, which I
Oh.
needed to upload, and like I'm just sitting there thinking like I'm baffled and like I guess yeah, I was objecting for like probably like a minute, but then I thought about it, like immediately. It's like I knew like what was going on, but I guess my gen was whispering like be mad, be mad. But no, it's something, just little example.
So.
So and then immediately like after that, like like repented for that objection,
Mm-hmm.
and then another situation, a little small situation came up, and like I guess in order to kind of be ridiculous this time, and it was but yeah, I guess the low hanging fruit thing kind of resonated with me
Mm-hmm.
recently because a few little things have happened here and there.
So.
Little things that you can
Mm-hmm.
easily do and
Easy,
get
yeah,
credit
exactly.
for.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just something nice, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Hey, it's not like something serious. It's not like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you wrecked your car, or you
Mm-hmm.
you you know you you bent your axle or something, and now like okay, but like it's something that really has no
Mm-hmm.
impact over you, because like what if my laptop would have got fried or something?
Mm-hmm.
Then I'd really be hurting. Like I spilled water all over it. That's what I
Right.
was thinking was afterwards, and then I became really grateful just for a
Mm-hmm.
conversation being
So,
deleted. But
yeah.
that's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
SubhanAllah.
Like it really. That's when I do that. It helps so much to
Mm-hmm.
make me like be grateful and then start being
Mm-hmm.
appreciative again, and not
Thank
object
God.
to anything like what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like, some of these things may be difficult for us in the beginning, or the first time or second time, but maybe the third time and fourth time might be easier. You know, hopefully, if we're going in the right
Mhm.
direction, working on our egos and killing our egos when we have an opportunity, and doing the right thing, especially in those scenarios like you mentioned, and especially when you find out you feel you have been wronged and there's injustice. Those feelings. Someone has
Yes.
been rude to you, or
Right.
mistreated you. Immediately, your instinct is to just be mad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then I think back to like a little. I have it copy and pasted in my notes, and I went repeated. About just objects. Like there's a submitter and objector, and
Mm-hmm.
you're either one or the other, and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that really helps a
Mm-hmm.
lot. So when the situations like that happens again, it's easily you know, like
Mm-hmm.
something other stuff has been happening just the past few days, like with I'm driving and then people my brights aren't even on and like people are flashing me and stuff. I guess because the headlights or
Mm-hmm.
so. I mean, it happens sometimes, because it's at night, but.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get mad or take it personal or like
Mm-hmm.
flashing back or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just stay cool and stay happy. Like
Mm-hmm. Subhanallah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, all these things are for our own happiness. If we realize that, we'll be much happier in life in general. Praise be to God for His
mashallah.
guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, and God is running everything,
Mm-hmm.
So whatever's happening, it's like they're not even doing anything, they're not
Mm-hmm.
even flashing me. It's
Mm-hmm.
just So
Yeah.
I just remind myself of that.
Yeah. I still remember that lady's reaction. When I was telling you about in the last study, where she kept honking at me. I think she would have honked at least like maybe
Yeah, I
15
remember.
times, 10 to 15 times. And she had like all the perfect characteristics of like a Karen. Like the popular Karen.
Right, right.
And yeah, and at first, like I shook my head, she didn't see me, but then thank God she came, pulled me from the other side, and kept honking again. So I had a chance to collect my thoughts.
Yeah,
And when I
that's a very I remember that.
yeah
That's
when I said
a
thank you, Like she couldn't believe it. She was so shocked. She's like, what? I'm sorry.
She was probably, yeah, because
Yeah,
nobody would have that reaction. She's probably watching. And
probably throw something
didn't
at
she
her.
like wave at you? Yeah, didn't she wave at you or say
No,
goodbye or something?
she said, okay, so be safe.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
subhanAllah.
yeah,
Look, yeah, you just change your situation into something great. Yeah. MashaAllah.
The thing I've noticed with my ego is like it's a death by a thousand cuts. Like you can't just kill it right away. It's not like a gunshot. You kill certain parts about it. So like for instance, in that example, like you killed the ego when it came down to somebody honking. But then somebody comes up to you with your face, and you're like, okay, this is the one I got to defeat now next. Do you know what I mean? So it's like there's different tests, and like if you pass a certain test, it doesn't mean it's over. It means like you still got another one to come, right?
Yeah,
You know,
It's
like,
kind of
you're
like
not
a
expecting
process.
it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it comes out of nowhere, man. It comes out of
yeah,
nowhere.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like it's a and I've learned that exactly what Brother Justin is saying, and then I think back to like what the messenger said. He said like, and that's something a while back. It's like it's why it's good to have like self reflection, self examination, because exactly what you said. Because I've noticed that it's like you think. And it's not like I'm sitting there telling myself, okay, 100% of my ego is dead, but it's like you're kind of always on guard, and then out of nowhere, there's some little situation that happens, and then when you look back, like I look back, I'm like, wow, there was there's some type of you know thing I need to look into there, and then the messenger says, kill means kill, or I think he said like kill means dead, or something like that, you know. Uh, so yeah, it's definitely a process.
Have you guys noticed that if you don't pass a test, a similar test will come around again, and and you're kind of reminded of it? Like, do you understand what I mean by that? Like, let's say you your ego got ahead of you, and then a very similar situation will come up later on, maybe right away or maybe a couple of years down the road, but it almost reminds you of that past incident. You're like, oh yeah, now it's come again. Now I got to be better. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes.
Yep.
Until you pass it,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mashallah, God gives us many chances. I mean,
Mashallah. God willing, we pass the
mashallah.
tests,
But
man.
it's good to long for these opportunities. So we can grow and get credit.
That's true. Very true.
But not to ask for them.
Not to ask for them, no, but to take
No.
them as
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah, like a challenge. Like
Yeah.
challenge accepted. You know.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's important to remember to cheerfully submit through everything, right?
Right.
Whatever happens, right? So
Mm-hmm.
God is running everything. Remembering that God is running everything. If someone cuts you off, remembering that God allowed it to happen. I'm not gonna object to what God is doing. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good reminder too. Is submission, but like you're not just submitting because like, oh man, I have to submit. And you're kind of huffing and puffing, like kicking rocks with your head down.
Right,
But
right.
it's like no, yeah, because I mean you can do that too, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not genuine.
Yeah,
I guess in a
genuine.
sense, it's because you're kind of like it's like you're
Yeah,
having to be told to or forced to, but like
yeah.
it's kind of like like a worker. Like you want the guy who doesn't have to go do his little task out of kind of he's mad about having to do it, but he still does it. Versus the guy who like is happy that he runs over to go do his little task and job, and he'll do it again. He's cheerful about it. So it's like I think like okay, which work would I want working for me? And it makes sense. We're happy to.
Yeah, I mean, imagine like you ran a company or something, right? And then you had some employee, like maybe a janitor or someone like that, like really low ranking person in your business who's always objecting to your decisions. So obviously, that's our example, objecting all the time to what God has done,
Right.
right? Probably worse.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
the greatest employee, that's for sure.
yeah. I had a dream about that once. That's how it stuck in my mind. Um, yeah, I had a dream about that. It's like I saw like it was. I don't know if it was me who was the boss or if it was me who was the employee or if it was neither. But I saw like this head of a company, and then you have this really low ranking person who was working. He was constantly objecting, to what the boss was decisions he was doing. And then I see the conversation happening between the two, where the boss says like, you're a nice person, but why do you keep objecting to what I'm doing or something like that? I remember that stuck in my head. It's interesting. I thought about it later. I was like, that completely relates to us, objecting to whatever's happening around us.
Right. And these people, they're always miserable. Like these are good examples. That God just gives us all throughout His creation, and this walk of life is like we can look at stuff like, and we can look at them as parallels. But yeah, it's like even just for the company I work for, I've seen people like the objectors, to object them to whatever. Like let's say the foreman is now enforcing, and when I say enforcing, like it's not even like, oh, like this mean rule, like no, it's just some new policy that is really
Mm-hmm.
actually good, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like people just want to object. Like you
Mm-hmm.
come out with a policy that's adds
Mm-hmm.
to say everybody's safety, and then yet maybe it could create a few extra steps in doing something, in a certain way or a certain process, but like there's 100% upside, 0% downside, and like people still find a reason to get mad and upset, and then I know these people. I work around them. I'll see them, and then like they're miserable, and it's like versus the people like me, or I don't want to say like me, but or someone else that I work with, he's like, okay, this is what the boss wants, right on, and like they're
Mm-hmm.
actually happy, like they go home, they're not like
Mm-hmm.
stressed out after work, and it's you can see the same thing with I guess like a submitter and objector
Mm-hmm.
to God. It's like yeah, the objector's never happy, like he's always going to be miserable,
Mm-hmm.
because God's the ultimate boss, and so
Mm-hmm.
always that's I mean he's so I mean who are we to try to make the
Mm-hmm.
rules, and I mean he knows best, so like how can we object,
Mm-hmm.
like even you know
Mm-hmm.
like so yeah, happiness is submission.
Mm-hmm. So, well, also we read about today about treating each other amicably. The treating. This was which verse we read? Um, verse 1753. Tell my servants to treat each other in the best possible manner, because the devil will always try to drive a wedge among them. Right. So. Um, I guess it's really important that when we talk to other submitters, we choose our words carefully. When we want to frame things, we frame them correctly. Let's I mean that they shouldn't try to you know paint paint the wrong picture, so to speak. Also, like a lot of times people will do all these things under the pretense of righteousness. I just want to remind so and so, like I want to remind my brother and sister, and then all those reminders, you're just constantly, throwing garbage at them, right? So they look bad, and you're doing it publicly, right? And it would even be one thing, like I found something about someone that is irritating, let's say, but I'm doing it publicly. And I'm saying no, but I'm not just saying it for the last few isolated incidents that we're talking about here too. I mean, this is something that I've seen it happen quite a lot in my past, with different people doing it to other people, and so this is part of it, right? I mean, if you think you're reminding people, remind them in a way that is helpful to them. Like, I mean, it's different if you're talking about a situation, a community situation that affects people, right? But let's say it's about somebody's, personal weaknesses or something, right? Um, it doesn't make sense that you kind of put them on blast to shame them, right? And also, the accusations that you make on a person, have to are based on your imagination or your ideas or of that person or your opinions that may be far from reality. Uh, but I mean that's something that sadly you see people do, right? But the thing is, yeah, I mean if you want to be on the right path and you want to be so holy and pure, I mean remember that that this is also part of the Quran. Like if you consider these people believers, I mean you do the right part. But I mean it's something that I've seen that people will use it as a sort of a revenge tactic. Also, I mean we all have our jinns with us, and obviously he's and the devil, so he's trying all tricks in the bag. But the thing is, when someone does resort to these types of things, it hurts them, right? It hurts them. I mean, they're trying to hurt the believers also by doing things if they're hypocrites. But if they're believers, they wouldn't do such a thing, and they wouldn't hurt other believers because genuinely, I think genuinely a submitter or a believer will have love and respect for another believer or their brother or sister. They would think twice naturally. It's just something God has placed in people's hearts. They wouldn't do it. They would be considerate of their feelings too when it comes to these types of things. They wouldn't want to hurt someone, right? And it reminds me of that situation where in front of the Messenger of the Covenant, where where this Adib's exposure, that audio about the Friday sermon, where he's calling the other person a liar, and he says, I'm kind of paraphrasing, so I'm sorry, but he said like, are you? I mean, something along the lines of him not being able to sleep, because you called him a liar. It's like, and saying that they were responsible for it, right? I wish I could remember exactly how he said it, but yeah, that part about him saying that that like hurting a person, the messenger talks about even having hurting thoughts, like for example, suspicion is a hurting thought. It's a very small, apparently a very small thing. You have suspicion about somebody, which is not even, the person doesn't even know about it, right? But imagine using words to hurt them, right? So you would think twice about that. So it's very important that we choose our words carefully and how they impact us, and also we should think twice about Quranic understandings or ideas or God's laws. I mean, these are important things, right? I mean, we can't just loosely spread misinformation, and then expect it to just be not corrected and just be, welcomed. So, I mean, but if people do say things wrong, we also have the responsibility to correct them, and each other. God says, but God says, the reminders benefit the believers. If you're a believer, the reminder will benefit you. If you're not a believer, then the reminder is not going to benefit you. It's going to, repel you further. But for us as submitters, God tells us that we should remind with the Quran, right? So, and we have to advocate righteousness. We have to forbid evil. So, if people come up with absurd ideas, we should correct them, right? Even if it hurts someone's feelings at that point, right? It's not about personal feelings. This is about God, right? So that's another thing.
Right. And these, and it's like they're, when we, do such a thing, it's like with the best intentions,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, having everybody's interest, So number one, it's like an innovation doesn't creep in,
Mm-hmm.
and you do so in a good manner, right? Like such was the example, like with
Mm-hmm.
like for example, recently with the Friday sermon,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're wrong the whole time. Like this
Mm-hmm.
person is wrong the whole time. They can't see it,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're treated very amicably, very kindly, very gently, and they're wrong. And then later on, they say, "Oh, we're wrong, but we don't like the tone that was used." So, like, let's just say, even if a tone afterwards was used, after they continue to object and object and object, and you raise your voice and say, "Hey, man, look, like you're wrong. You're gonna go into the ditch,"
Mm-hmm.
like, and they still get mad. Like they're just. I mean, at that point, they're just they have no case, because
Yeah.
it's like, well, if you would have submitted, like submitted to the truth and like not tried to come up with an innovation, or you wouldn't have been, killed your ego in the first place
Mm-hmm.
when advice, kindly and softly came to you, then we wouldn't even have this issue, But if the issue still stands and you stick to you stand firm
Mm-hmm.
and you continue to remind and they object at that point, whatever they bring upon themselves is on them,
Mm-hmm.
so
Well, I
they can't
mean,
sit there
yeah.
and complain. But I mean, even such thing wasn't the case, But
Yeah,
I
because
guess I'm trying to make a point
mm-hmm. Yeah.
that
Yeah,
yeah,
because in that case, like what you said, I mean, from the beginning, I was smiling and everything, So it's like,
right.
anyways, um, I mean, if they don't didn't like it, let's say my tone changed in the end, which even at the end it was fine,
It was
up
still
until
right, yeah,
up until the time that he compared it to the pot heads
right,
being astray. I mean, I was even. I mean, there was no reason to even want to raise my voice. I mean, I was just trying to
yeah,
clarify his misunderstanding. I was like, I was like, I kept thinking that no, I'm sure that. I mean, that's always my trail of thought, right? When I talk to people,
right,
that's always my trail of thought. I was like, okay, no, this person's a submitter, and if I can just logically explain to this person like what this is, like they'll definitely understand. And so like there came the example of a poem versus an essay, right? So that all being logical, right? So there's no reason to even want to be upset. And I was telling him like, hey, look, I think you're getting personal. You're taking it personally. Don't take it personally. Just this is a logical thing.
right.
But like you said. So anyways, I mean,
Yeah, people find. I
yeah.
guess after the fact, it's like, okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I was wrong.
but like
But anytime
this
they
is
say
this is
but,
I must say that this is someone this is someone that thinks that Abraham was had an attitude. Okay, God says in the Quran. Sorry for laughing. God says in the Quran that Abraham was extremely kind and clement. Right? God says that there's a verse in the Quran that says Abraham was extremely kind and clement. And when we came, this happened outside our online studies, but I was at a Quran study, and with the same person, and there was a verse where Abraham said to his father, he says, "I will disown you, right, and the gods you worship," and he made the comment. He said that. Abraham said this because he was Middle Eastern, and he said this sort of these kinds of things actually repel people from God's path. You know, and my jaw just dropped. I was like, "Are you serious?" I was like, "No,
uh,
God says that
it's
Abraham was extremely kind and clement, and
right,
his father was disbeliever in
right.
him, and he says he was too harsh in disowning his father."
Yeah,
I,
people
I
are
mean, he could say that about Abraham's father, who said he would kill him before he said, "I'll
right,
disown you," but he chose to say it about Abraham. So
right.
it
Because we
defies.
have in the Quran, right, he was
Yeah.
kind and clement, but
So,
we don't have in the Quran
but
that he was, yeah,
but I mean, imagine Abraham's father was the one who said, "I would kill you if you don't stop," and he could choose to say it about Abraham's father, but his comment was about Abraham.
Right. Yeah.
So, anyways, I mean, if he found fault with Abraham, then it's understandable.
Yeah. It's like, man, people just, I guess, come up with their own
Yeah, yeah,
ideas and
it's
interpretations,
like.
and it's sometimes it's easy to do so. And I think it's what you were saying earlier. It's like when you think you know so much,
Mhm.
uh, because it almost kind of happened to me. Well, it didn't really happen to me in the
In
beginning,
the
but
beginning, exactly.
um,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
it's it
It creeps later on. Yeah.
yes.
Yes. Mashallah.
Okay, I just had this phone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
mashallah.
it tries to creep up on you, and
Mhm.
but then you just, like, I guess for my situations, like you realize, what's at stake, and then when you see, how, I guess, how much more there is to learn, and it's a constant process, and you just kind of
Mhm.
get rid of that whole framework that's in you as a human to just make these. Because in the beginning it's easy, like I had certain ideas
Mhm.
or something, but as more as time went on, it's like, okay, you don't know, and because and that belief is reaffirmed with as time passes. It's like, oh man, like this little situation or thing I thought, like, that actually turned out to be wrong. Like,
Mhm.
oh, well, wow, what else? What else is, sure, keep finding it, and it's, I guess, like a framework or a precedent for yourself, being
Mhm.
open to,
Mhm.
just not coming up with these crazy ideas, uh, anymore, or that you
Mhm.
formulated somehow. Um, and then I think that those things, like,
Sorry,
people
John, you're breaking out
think
pretty
they're
bad.
not.
You're breaking. Your voice is breaking out.
Okay, okay.
It's better now. Sorry, can you repeat that last part? The last two
Yeah, I
sentences.
think my service was no, I was just saying, it's how the devil adorns these,
Mm-hmm.
it can
Oh
adorn
yeah.
certain ideas and stuff in us, because I mean, why else would, like, people hold on to
Mm-hmm.
certain stuff
Mm-hmm.
that's, like, pretty outlandish,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow, self can't see self for the moment. You can't see how kind of ludicrous something may seem.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason you've fallen in love with it,
Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
just be
Right.
the devil
Right.
make uh,
Ego.
pretty,
Mm-hmm.
you
Ego
know,
becomes your god at that point.
right?
Yeah.
Because I
So.
mean, almost in a way, it's like you come up with your own. It's almost like you trying to come up with your own little truth. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not there, it's not the Quran, but the fact that you believe it
Mm-hmm.
to be this way, it's like, okay, I have my own little, like, religious truth known to myself, and I want to impose it
Mm-hmm.
on people. And I'm saying this because, like, it's and long ago, I mean, this is like little stuff that would creep into me, but, like, eventually, or never let it, it
Mm-hmm.
just didn't become part of me, because you realize, too much is at risk to
Mm-hmm.
into these types of, things.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, so now we have um, more of us having to give our turns for studies. So, like English, for the English study, for example, there are for Saturday study, there's one, two, three, four teachers, and then the Tuesday study, there's only two teachers. So we'll have more frequent turns to lead studies. So um, if anyone wants to like move, so schedule changed after those people left, and so I have reordered the schedule. So please look at the schedule, and if something doesn't work out, please let me know. God willing.
God willing, we'll all adapt, right?
Mm-hmm. Inshallah. Yes. Quality is better than quantity. Inshallah. Okay, so I guess if there are no other comments or questions, God willing, we can end the study. Thank you all for joining us. God willing, our next English Quran study would be on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam alaikum. God bless.
Are we going